sometimes development teams, this is testers, developers, database engineers, sometimes they find it a little bit hard to consume UX findings and UX research. We live in our own heads in terms of trying to pull out the voice of the customer and that, but translating that into a usable language for people can be problematic at times. And also, it can be a little bit vague in terms of, we have a big insight which, you know, says there's friction around this thing, there's a problem with customers. But what developers are looking for, and what teams are looking for in BAs is, can we turn that into an actionable item? So it's coming from the abstract into the tangible, and that's another problem if we don't do that. There's also lots of assumptions when we start off projects. There's lots of, you know, we might use this tech, we might go in that direction. And if we don't do what's called an assumption clearinghouse at the start of a project, those assumptions can come back and actually derail a project. And on top of that, as UX designers, I want us to also think about, we do UX for business, we do UX for clients and customers, but are we addressing the UX for teams? So are we addressing the UX needs of, instead of just giving a big report document to the team and asking them to consume that, are we thinking about how they might consume it and how we might break that down? So there's some of the big problems that I've come across. So let's start with different types of research we have. So working from the left to right, we have traditional kind of, you know, Word document-based research. We've got in the background, we've got some metrics and pies. I use insight cards as well, which is the green card, where I take a bunch of kind of friction points and try to turn it into an insight on that. And then we have what I also call visual insights. So these are ways of actually turning dense research data into, you know, like playful material that are easy to consume. So we start there, and these are good methods of actually condensing and synthesizing down research. But I still think there's another opportunity in Colab that we can actually go through. So I'm going to go through tonight just 3 collaborative practices that I use. And the secret to this, it's collaborative. So it's not a BA and a UX designer going off on their own. It's in the team, with the stakeholder, with the head of product, with the database, with the project managers, the scrum master, the developers, the database guys. Everyone who's on the team are in there, including the testers. So one of the first canvases I use is the knowledge share canvas. It's a really simple tool. It's broken up into 3 columns: what we know today, what we're unclear about, and what are the big unknowns. So the first column, the what we already know, this is usually the head of product or a key stakeholder, or it could be any one of our UX designers, just really doing a playback for the team of what we know today. And how do we rank this? If you look down the bottom, we rank it on reliability, like how reliable is that information? So if I've gone off and I've done primary research with a number of our customers, and I've got like voice of the customer, literally from the customer, from a good sample size, we can kind of probably rest assured that that's pretty reliable. However, if we said, well, sales have heard something, somebody else has heard something, and, you know, developers heard something true, we probably put that mid to low reliability because that's attitudinal. But we might say, well, how can we turn that low reliability into high reliability? We might need to go out and actually do a bit around or research around those friction points. Are they real friction points, or is it just availability bias? I think it's a problem because it's the most recent thing I heard. So we want a deep bias for that. So the stakeholders talk in the first column about what we already know, and we rank it for reliability. And if things are low reliability, we might spike them off into additional research activities. At this point, after the initial knowledge share of what we know, the whole team are available then to ask the stakeholders of the UX designers, so what do we know about this? Have we heard about that? And again, we can create a backlog of additional things we need to investigate. So that's literally all the stakeholders have in the involvement on this. The next 2 columns, the unclear and unknowns, is literally down to the team. And it's around their knowledge. It's not around the solution. It's around what are we unclear about in terms of the project. It can be anything from the scope, the tech stack, how we're going to deliver this thing, what's needed to be delivered, who are we delivering it to. There are examples of unclear. Even time frame. So we're trying to get a whole list of backlog items, and then we're going to break them down into impact and estimate for effort to solve those, which I'll show you on the next slide. The last part for the big unknowns, these are things that definitely can scupper a project. So An example of that would be if we were working on a project with a third party and we were to have to integrate with a third party, but nobody on the team knew if there was an API even available or how we're going to integrate. Well, that would be a big unknown. And again, with the unclears and the unknowns, down at the bottom of the screen here, we're listing impacts. Is it a small, a medium, or a really large impact? And now we haven't moved into solution mode yet. We're just talking about potential risk and impact on the project if we don't answer these questions, which is separate to if we don't build this. And that's really the start of just gathering all those kind of big unknowns and big unclears. So although the canvas looks like this, you can deliver it in many ways. Like this is the same knowledge share canvas done in two different ways. On the left, it's a traditional whiteboard with just things being grouped into big unknowns and impacts. And on the right is the same exercise done with Trello. So it's not important the tool you use. What is important, you actually go through the whole practice of listing out things. And the next thing from each one of these big unclear, big unknowns is we can talk about ranking them. So here's an example of a potential project and everyone's listed down. We've grouped together, maybe a couple of people have listed, scope is a thing we think we're unclear about, MVP delivery, how's the UI being delivered. So the team then would, similar to story point rating in Agile, the whole team would do a small, medium, or large in terms of the impact. So it's not that we would build that scope. It's if we didn't understand, regardless of what the scope is, if we didn't actually understand from the product owner the scope of what's expected, what would be the impact to the project? Is that small, medium, or large? And generally something like that is probably a large impact. The next part is straight out of Google Design Sprints. Then we think about as many as we want ideas, how might we solve that? So one might be go and talk to the product owner. Another might be go out and do more research with the end users and find out what's needed and wanted. And then the last part is the effort. It's just t-shirt sizing of, for these ideas to solve these, are they small, medium, or large effort? And we work our way down through these unclears. So generally what we should be doing as a team here is ranking things by small, medium, or large. And instead of just trying to solve the small, easy to solve things first, because that feels kind of comfortable and that they're easy to solve, we should be looking at medium and large impacts first, because they're the things that could derail or delay a project or even blow it totally off course. And we can go through that for the unclears and the unknowns. And on projects I've worked before, some of these unclear and unknowns have become our sprint 1 or sprint 2 backlog items. So the BA can take these and actually turn them into backlog stories as spike stories and things like that. So again, a great kind of simple tool for just getting to share the knowledge, bake in some of the insights and some of the things we found. Sometimes from the big unclear and unknowns, we said, like, that's fine, we actually have some insights. And sometimes the product owner said, look, I actually have a delivery time frame and a scope, I just haven't shared it yet, but I'll book it in as the next exercise we do to kind of do those additional knowledge shares. So the next exercise from that, the next canvas I use is what's called a design principles canvas. So this is really taking all those, as we start to massage some of those big backlog epics and things in our sprints, we use what I call designing with intent. And this comes from the research and also comes from the backlog items that we have in our sprint. And this again, I do as a collaborative exercise with the teams. So a design principle would be based on the research and the needs of customers. How do we want to intentionally design that way? So an example of a design principle might be from the research we found that people who are doing an application, be it a financial application or a membership application, didn't realize there was a cost impact later on. And they got really annoyed at a later date when they were presented with a bill. So people aren't understanding that choices they pick in the flow might have a financial or an impact on them. So a design principle would be, anytime there's an impact on a customer or a client, we'll present the impacts to them in a clear and understandable way. Another design principle might be for customers continuously making mistakes, we will employ defensive design and error capture methods that will take the hit of that. We won't ask the customer to clean that up. We might even do canonicalization where we will allow them to put in codes with spaces and we'll strip all that out and store it away. So we'll take that hit. So that's a design principle that it's based around UI forgiveness. We'll allow customers to put in things the way they think they should be, And then if there's any additional cleanup, we'll do it on our side. So how we deliver those, any of those design principles is open to how the team plan in their sprint planning. It doesn't, design principles don't dictate you should use this technology. It just says every time we're doing a story and maybe doing a definition of done, we're coming back to the principles which are based on the research and the insights, and we're saying, how are we solving for this friction point? We're reminding ourselves as a team of these principles of, defensive design, de-jargonized language, good usability, great outcomes, understandable outcomes. So it's really important that we're constantly evaluating against these design principles. And again, the developers themselves can have design principles. They could say, we have a principle where no code will go into a stage in our development environment unless it's gone through 3 forms of peer review, or some sanity checking, or some test data that's been sanitized. So there's no limit on how many principles you can write as a team. It's just really you're using them as a touch point to continuously come back and actually say, have we reached that, or have we compromised that principle? And the last collab exercise I do to help take some of those insights and research and actually bake them in a contextual way is what I call the reverse journey. So again, it's a collaborative exercise I do with the whole development team. Stakeholders can be in, head of product can be in, BAs can be in, PMs can be in on this. It doesn't matter. Whoever wants to be involved can be involved. So a reverse journey is a really way of disrupting our own thinking, including my own thinking, where we start at the end of the journey and we work our way back. And what it does, it's a way of actually de-biasing us from thinking about how things are done today. Because if we start at the, I'm logging into the website, I'm doing this, we tend to frame it around how things are done today. So what we're trying to do is disrupt that thinking and actually frame it around how it could be tomorrow. So with the reverse journey, the first thing we do is define the outcome. So when we did that research, when we spoke to those customers, what did they define as an ideal outcome? Like I want my application done. I want my notification sent by email. I don't want to sign up. By doing an application, you automatically sign me up. So you send me out an email that I can jump back into my previous progress in my application. Or whatever that good outcome is, we define that as the end goal. And then we work our way back. So the first thing we do then in the reverse journey, once we have the ideal outcome, we go back to the previous step. So what was the thing they did before that very end? And here we bake in opportunities, the whole experience, and also down the bottom, we see the voice of the customer. So we're bringing in a contextual way, reminding the developers and other designers, look, here's why it's important. Here's what we heard in the research. Here's that big insight that they said, you sign me up for an application, but you don't tell me how long it's going to be before I'm approved. You sign me up for this, but you never tell me when I'll have my SaaS platform activated. So we bake all those insights back in here, and in the top box is that's the opportunity space, that's the differentiation space, the customer experience space. The middle box is, well, we can't do that today because of these things. And again, we do, how might we remove those challenges and limitations and barriers? How might we reframe how we do things today? That again might lead to other backlog stories, other spike stories around the tech. It might lead into investigating new tech or investigating new ways of sequencing our services as well. And then we just work back through that step by step until we get to the start. This is a way of designing those barriers out of the system, designing all those friction points that really disengage customers. And at each time when the team are asking, like, is it important, we bring in the voice of the customer. Here's what we heard in research. Here's what they told us about this point when we asked them to pick 20 choices to sign up when they just want to put in a username and password. And again, it's a great collaborative tool for baking in insights in a contextual way, but also talking about assumptions, because sometimes the team would say, well, I just assumed we were using that tech stack or that service again, and we can have a chat about that. So I put some useful links. I'm going to share at the canvas when I'm done. I'll put some useful links onto some of those bits and pieces that I've shown to you. And that's basically all I have. What I'll probably do is share some of the canvases as well through the UXB&A post this presentation. So thanks, everyone. If you have any questions, just shoot them through in Slido, like Han said. And thanks, everyone, for attending tonight.
Beautiful. Awesome. Awesome beans. Thank you, Colin, for walking us through a lot of the different canvases I'm gonna head over to Slido and see if we can do some Q&A. That sound good?
Yeah.
All right, sweet. If you haven't already, I'm just gonna share my screen again. Head on over to www.sli.do, and if you see that join as a participant, hit in UX BNE and jump in and add in your questions. That sound good? Cool. All right, so I'm gonna share screen to Slido and let's get cracking. Cool. So our first question, Colin, is a couple of top voted ones. More companies are going remote first and are planning to stay that way. How can UX make the most of this new normal? And will it be a blessing or a curse?
Okay, yeah, really good topical question. I actually don't think it's a problem. I don't think remoteness is the problem. I never have. I've worked on remote teams at different ends of the country in Europe and in over here in Australia and also in New Zealand. It's actually not the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is assumptions and lack of communication and lack of clear communication. So I think UX still has a big part to play. Like when I talk about the UX of teams, I think about how are we helping our team reach understanding and smoothing out those friction points in terms of direction and the knowledge share which I showed you. The one we did in Trello was done between Brisbane and London in real time, and we voted and we raised stuff in real time. There's so many tools out there. It's not a problem. I mean, Google have Jamboards. There's Google Sheets. You can use anything you want today. It's really my probably advice for anyone doing these is do a bit of prep work. Maybe do locally in the office. If you're going to do a remote session, maybe pick one person remotely and just do a run through, do a prep walkthrough, iron out the rough points, be really clear on the intent of why you're doing this practice. So don't just go in and say, hey guys, we're going to do this practice, and people go, hang on a minute, why are we doing it? So spend a bit of time around why it's important to do these and what is the outcome. So when I do the knowledge share, I talk about the outcome for this we'll be a lot clearer on some of the big problems that are involved in the project, and we'll also have some clarity around the impacts of those things. So yeah, the remote thing isn't for me, it's not an issue really, and I think UX designers and any designers have a big part to play in helping shape those conversations.
Beautiful.
Mm.
All right, got a second one. Are the design principles one-off or every sprint?
So it's flexible. It's how the team want to work. Like the team will form a social contract. You can have one sprint, one principle, different design principle next sprint. It really depends on the whole rhythm of the team. Generally, what I try to do if I have a lot of research up front is I try to go through that with the team and just impart what I've heard as an insight and let us collectively come up. So if I have a lot of research, we probably wouldn't have a problem raising 5 or 6 design principles. However, if we were doing lean, we just start with our big known assumption, let's go out and test that. We might go out and test that with no design principles and then come back 2 sprints later, say, hey, based on what we found, let's have a principle around de-jargonizing the language. Let's have a principle around protecting customers from getting into errors. So there's no right or wrong. It's like I said at the start, it's not a fact that you use them in a prescriptive way. It's just go through the practice and match the practice to the rhythm of the development cycle.
Cool. All right. Andy, so what size teams have you worked with, and for which type of clients do you think this worked best?
So the answer to that is easy. It's everyone. I've worked on teams with up to 30 people in 3 different countries, and I've worked on teams with 4 people and right down to 3 people. So it doesn't matter how big teams are. Everyone has their own assumption and understanding of the knowledge and scope. As a simple exercise, even to sanity check 3 or 4 people in a room, say, have we all got the same understanding? And the reason, the driver for me to develop these campuses was in some parts of my early career, I remember a project where the team, including myself, made massive assumptions. And about halfway through the project, we got absolutely scuppered because somebody came in late stage and said, well, what about this? And we said, that's not important. And they said, actually it is, it's primarily important because of this relationship with this partner. And nobody in the team had line of sight to that thing. And it really had a massive impact. It caused us to literally throw away code, rewrite code, a lot of late nights, and a lot of stress and frustration. So even with small teams, we can get the same assumptions. Like we just assume we're using the same services, the same tech stack, we're using the same UI, it's the same customer problem. So the knowledge share is really a case of, like I call it, an assumptions clearinghouse. It's a way of, just test our own assumptions, including my own. Am I on the right track? And if we have differences of opinions, well, let's talk about that. It's not about being right or wrong. It's about, we have a difference of opinion as a team with the product owner and stakeholders. Okay, let's collectively talk about that. Let's clarify our understanding. Because we always talk about, shared understanding, but as a practice, we don't have any supporting practice apart from, hey, Hans, read this document and tell me you understand it. But that's a passive model. I want a really active model that gets people to say, I don't think that's right. You go, I do think that's right. And, just talk about that.
Yeah, and I guess part of being in a remote setting when you're using digital tools is that as you look at some of these assumptions that you surfaced, over time, when you actually validate them, you can update that documentation source of truth, and that refreshes everybody's minds on where things are at, which I think, in the beginning is pretty cool. I hope that answers your question, Andy. Cool. We've got another one here. I assume that the reverse journey is in a state where you already know the journey.
Sometimes and sometimes not. Sometimes you have some insights about a friction point. So you don't know the journey. You have an insight from a customer who says, I don't want to do this and I don't want to do that. I want to just get here. So sometimes the customers articulate, they don't tell you how they want to do it. And then other times we have lots and lots of research and we know the steps you need to go through. In finance and certain other pharmaceutical markets, that there are regulations as well you have to follow. So there's times when you have to interject part of the flow from either legal or regulation or due diligence. You have to do these things, but it's a way of thinking, how can you bake them in context to the customer? But again, like any reverse flow, like I never take a reverse flow verbatim. You still got to go out and test that. You still got to validate it. It's just you have a starting position to say, let's start with a great outcome and let's work our way back, as opposed to saying, here's what the tech stack does. Let's deliver the tech stack and hope it delivers an experience that we look for. Because the worst thing we have in any development cycle is pulling tech apart to reverse and re-engineer it because it doesn't deliver. So it's a different way of reframing, and we can have a conversation around assumptions about that tech stack and assumptions about sequencing of the services as well. And if we're in any doubt, we can go out and validate that. And I have used it to validate in real world scenarios where we've gone out and validated that. And customers have said to me, if you do it that way, I'm not gonna use your service. So we've used that reverse engineering to say, okay, what if we give this experience here? And then it's a case of, as a UX designer, you've got to go through and build up your evidence and your empirical data for the stakeholders to convince them, but I know it's going to cost us more, but this will, we've tested this, is going to give us a better outcome.
Beautiful. It's that principle of starting with the end in mind, hey.
Yeah, it's a way of disrupting our own thinking, Hans, because sometimes we can, even myself, we can get stuck into, I've done this flow before, we just need an ABC. And it's a way of actually disrupting our own thinking and not going into autopilot.
Yeah, beautiful. There was a similar question around a reverse journey map, so I'm gonna ask that, and then we'll get on to the others. So when we do a reverse journey map, how would you identify the problems or challenges the user faces?
So that's when I talked about the blue circles down the bottom, the voice of the customer. There are those friction and pain points there. I don't know why you want me to sign up in full. Can I not just give you my password? I don't know why you need all my documentation here. Can I not just be a member first and then we see? So all those kind of pain points we bring in. So that's from the research. So that's what I mean by voice of the customer. And sometimes they're not pain points. Sometimes they're opportunities of, I wish you guys did this. I wish your company, like you do A and B for me. I wish you could do C. So we're also looking at the opportunity space, which again builds a differentiation with your competitors and that. So really as UX designers, this is why I like the reverse journey, because in context, as the team are talking about something, we're saying, hey, remember this thing about clients, remember this thing we heard, remember this thing like 50% of our customers heard. So it's a really nice contextual exercise of not disconnecting research and development and actually pulling the two parts together. This is why this is important. What can we do about this thing? But it's still not prescriptive around it. It still doesn't say, hey, developers, you should code this way or you should do these things. It's still open to how might we solve this problem. And generally, we as a team, we might come up with 5 or 6 different ways to solve for that, single problem.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Kate. So what sort of tools or practices do you use to surface assumptions?
So I use one. I'll share this really quickly. I didn't put it in the slide. Hans, is it okay if I share this one really quickly, because it's in a context. Yeah. So I use a. You can draw it or have a. You can draw it or have a on a whiteboard or a prepared template. So let me start with if everyone's heard of the Nielsen Norm Group, they use sorry, find the name. They use a thing called scales of prioritization, where they go around features and how much effort do we have to, how important is it in a project. So they put all the features and all the effort in that. I actually think there's a rationalization bias with this, because as humans we go, okay, I think mobile payments is really high, so we'll move chatbot down, so we rationalize stuff. So I do single things. I call it scales of importance. So I'm a single item. So this is an actual one-off a project for the amount of user testing we need to do for the project. So one of the design principles for this project was to build a self-managed experience for the client. So the team, we on the scale of importance, we said, how important is it that we do a lot of user testing for the project? And we see we have people grouped around the middle, grouped around a high amount of user testing, a moderate amount, and people also a low amount. So this is an assumptions exercise where we go, okay, let's talk about that. We have extremes at both ends and a kind of a grouping around the 50 to 70% mark. So we can then talk about what do we mean by user testing? What do we all think the amount is? What type of user testing? And why do we have 2 outliers? One is extremely high amount and somebody basically saying little or no user testing. So we come back to the design principles. Now for this project, it was, we wanted to build a self-managed experience that removed the need for hands-on by the admin staff and operations staff. So if that's a design principle and we're saying we need to do little or no testing, well, how can we meet those? So this is an exercise that I use, and you can do a number of these. There's a ton of different scales of importance. Like here's an example of, self-managed experience. Is it really important or less important? What about operator repairable? So that's a general operator who's not a coder. Can he repair a flow for a customer? What about training? Is there a high amount of training required or a low amount of training required? So we're always coming back to the design principles. But I do these one at a time. I don't do them together because we get a bit of a rationalization bias, where if we're just focusing on one, we're solely focusing on that low, medium, or high for that one. So that's one of the tools I've used. And you can see there, it can be, a sketch, or it can be written up on a whiteboard. It doesn't really matter what tool you use. I hope that answers the question, Hans.
Yeah. All right. We've got one more here. By the way, the Slido is still open. So if you guys have any more questions, feel free to just pop that in there. So what if you're still at a startup customer need discovery stage before you have a product UX and before you have captive stakeholders to interview?
So you can still start with your knowledge share. Like, what do we know? It's like a state of the nation. What do we know right now? It doesn't have to be right, but we want to see, does everyone in the room who's on the team, do they have that same shared understanding? Because if somebody says, well, I thought we had an API for that, and somebody says, no, there's no API for that. Or we have a very simple one is, what's the release date of the first product? I mean, it's amazing how many products I've been in where the head of product goes, I don't know. And you're going to go, well, I think that's a big impact. And the team thinks it's a big impact. So sometimes it's not always technical, but it doesn't matter if you're in startup or it's an optimization. A knowledge share is a really good exercise to just go around the house and say, like, right now, what do we know? Because the next thing you can do is, for as a team, what are we unclear? What are the big unknowns? Like, raise those issues and impacts, and then think about, are they small, medium, or large? And then what do we need to do first? Because it helps orientate a team. Because a team go, we need to do lots, but I don't know where to start. So for me, the knowledge share, the output of the knowledge share is, it ranks the really big impacts, and they're the things we go after first, and they're the things we get an answer to. Not solve from a code point of base or product, but just have an answer, have a position. And it's okay to iterate through that and change that position. But what we're trying to do is the teams collectively have the same shared understanding.
Absolutely, man. I've been in like a room where, as I mentioned, like way back when we were doing remote design sprints, when you have a multidisciplinary team raising their assumptions,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the times, like people from other disciplines can answer those assumptions that have been raised and squash that, validate that straight right in that meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And for startup founders as well, when they stop and think about what they think they know, and then just put it down on paper and see where the themes lie, it's really like eye-opening for them to go, oh yeah, oh wait, hold on, I actually don't know a lot about this, so I better, the next action item would be to dig deep into that particular assumption and validate it.
And it's nothing wrong with, I've been in those as well, where I'm one of the people saying I don't know. But with the knowledge share canvas, I have those stepping stones of where I need to go next. I have the things that pivot to me. That, okay, I don't know these things. We've ranked them. We've talked them through with the stakeholders and the head of product. Out of these 50 things, it's these 3 things are the most critical things we need to solve or have an answer for. So it gives you that lovely kind of pivot to, okay, I know where I need to go. And, you can do that. You can do a knowledge share canvas, a number of times through a project. It's not always a done thing. It's something that you just do as a practice, as a team. And it's a great way of getting, what I found by doing it, some of the very quiet people on the team, the kind of more introverts on the team, it's a great way of them being able to articulate their worries and concerns, because it's a very democratic process. Nobody's screaming over anyone else. We're just going, what do we know?
That's it. And that's where you can get the most out of people's perspective.
Absolutely,
too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 100% agree on that.
Yeah.
Cool, Cherie. So what are some ways we can communicate the basics of our user research to developers of other people or other people in our team that just want an overview? Really good question.
Yeah. So one thing that I use, which is straight out of Strategizer, is the insight cards. I love them because I have a really dense user research, and I just break it down to things like people have a problem understanding our product because of the language and the jargon. So I just bake all those big, dense kind of findings and fiction things down into an insight card. So I love insight cards, and I've worked with, I think Susanna's on the line here as well at the meetup. And I've worked with Susanna before in some core and Credit Sense, turning those big, dense things into insight cards. And we had a practice where Susanna put them up on the wall and turned around to team just, how are we solving for that in our sprint planning? How are we solving for these things? So they're really nice touch points. It's not to beat people over the team. It's just touch points to constantly remind people, how are we solving for prevention of error? How are we solving for de-jargon and usable language and things like where decision and choice have a financial and a legal impact on people? How are we always maintaining that we're presenting those impacts them up front? So I love insight cards because they're short, they're brief. If anyone hasn't seen them before, go to strategizer.com, have a look at them there. They've got test cards and insight cards, and it's such a simple tool. I'm amazed more people don't use it.
Do you have some examples?
Yeah, I'll share one out now.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's an example of an insight card. So this came from about 10 partner surveys and questions, and about 3 or 4 rounds of usability testing. So we've condensed them down So basically, customers are confused by the language and terminology. It's as simple as that. And we had a hypothesis we'd go out and test some add-ons for a SaaS service. Customers were struggling to understand all the different language we used to do. So we sometimes describe add-ons as additionals, extra, plugins, add-ons, features, all this different dense language to describe the same thing. And nearly 12% of customers were unclear what was on offer when they went into that section. So then we had an actionable item. Look, let's look at standardizing and improving the language. Let's make things clear and unambiguous. So that's an insight card around. You could put this on any platform I've ever worked on. How do we make language clear and understandable and contextual to the user? And these go up on walls, and people, every time we do a sprint planning and every time we do a UI, we say, hey, remember this insight card, how will we solve for these problems? Really simple. It doesn't have to be flowery language. It just has to be clear.
Absolutely. I think having something, these tools are a way to communicate and make knowledge transparent to the wider team, which helps progress the efforts in the project in the long run, simple but super effective.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about. It's really about, I keep coming back with the UX for teams. As UX designers, how are we thinking about our UX? We do UX for customers, and we'd be really upset if the business said, hey, forget about customers, give them a shitty experience. But we sometimes forget about our team members. What is the UX experience we're delivering to them? Are we giving them big reams of dense material, say, hey, read and understand this? Because they're busy as well. They've got technical documents to get through. They've got architectural meetings to get through. And we're just overloading them with more data. So what can we do to break down those kind of dense insights into something as simple as an insight card or design principle?
Absolutely, man. Totally agree with that. That is really cool. All right. So, okay, cool. We've got one more question here. Do you have any UX book recommendations?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Hans just broke up a bit. Any?
Do you have any UX book recommendations?
Oh, wow. I know let you into a secret. I don't read a lot of UX books. I follow two websites. There's the Nielsen Norman group. They've got a lot of good content on there. But my all-time hero is a guy called Jared Spool. I saw him talking in Wellington about 2009, 2010, and he just blew my mind with his whole approach to design problems and our design style for that. So I'd recommend anything by Jared Spool, who works for UIE. I don't read a lot of UX books. I tend to read an awful lot of psychology books, things like Nudge Theory and Daniel Kahneman and Jesse Prince. And Dan Early, people like that. I'm more interested in decision making that people take and some of the barriers to those decisions. And that's just me. I don't know if that's a right or wrong answer.
Yeah. Anyone else? Feel free to jump on board if you have a UX book recommendation that you've read recently that you felt was really insightful, and why. Feel free to jump on, unmute, and share with the community.
The probably one thing I would recommend is Rosenfeld Media, who we were talking earlier about, Indy Young, and her mental model book, which had a major impact on my own UX practice. I'd probably recommend that. But have a look at rosenfeldmedia.com. They've got a broad range of books. They've got one on how to interview customers. They've got one on like I say, Indy Young's mental models, I can't think of the others, but they've got a rich kind of catalog in there worth checking out.
Yeah, man, there were so many books, even for UX designers of one. I know that a lot of people find themselves being the only UX designer within a company, and they'll have to manage like so many different things. How do you actually do that effectively? We've got a couple of recommendations from the chat: Nudge Theory and Daniel Kahneman.
Daniel Kahneman, yeah, Think Fast and Slow. I'd recommend that to anyone. It's a fantastic book, and it's based around probably 40 or 50 years of his career, all summed up in that one book. It's a fantastic read.
We've got Don't Make Me Think by Steve, I can't, Steve Krug or Steve Krug. Dean Inspired, How to Create Tech Products Customers Love. Actually really love that book. Yeah, cool. All right, if we have any more questions, feel free to jot them down over to Slido. If not, we'll open it up to, there was actually one topic that I wanted to talk about, which was in this chat as you were chatting, as you were doing your prezzo, Colin, which was like the use of Agile methods in design and development, and whether or not it's common here in Australia. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it is pretty common as a kind of a global practice. The variance in how it's practiced is what I probably noticed between doing Agile in New Zealand and over here in Australia. I've worked in really Agile teams that had good social contracts and good rituals, and then I've also worked in teams that were a bit more laggard, and they would meet up if they felt like it, or they kind of had, I suppose, more of a rigid approach, being told what to do rather than team planning. We'd be given a list of things and deliver these. But I still think it's a really good practice. One thing I like about Agile is again, it gets us thinking about what we're building this sprint, and thinking about what will make an impact, like what's that valuable impact for the MVP or the next release of the product. So I think as UX designers, if we can help, validate some of these big impactful items and, put some context around why this thing is really important. And our job is there to help shape the product, supporting the head of product and supporting the development teams to success. So I love Agile. I've also done a bit of lean UX as well. But for me, it just comes down, I don't really care what we call it. It's just the practice of collaboration is more important than, you call it whatever you want.
That's it, man. That's it. Like, that's the principle of it all at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
What are other people's experiences with actually, I'll ask you this one, Colin. Like, how might you help an organization or a design team as well adopt the Agile principles? Have you experienced like situations where you've had to sort of increase that adoption or found friction in getting teams to adopt this way of working?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It can be challenging based on culture. There's a perception around it's disruptive, it takes time. And you can kind of get lost in those, it takes time, it's costing that. So with anything like that, I use the same method that I use to reverse engineer, which I call it designing with intention or acting with intention. So if I'm trying to do something with teams, like when I've worked with teams before, and we identified some big problems for customers or clients, and we're trying to get them to a point, start at the end, start at what's the outcome we're going to get from this, and be really clear about that intention of how we're going to deliver to that outcome. In terms of the nuts and bolts of how you get there, that's okay. But the intention, be really clear about why and why it's important to get to that. And so start with the end and reverse that journey back. So when I've talked to companies about that, when they say, look, why should we do this? What's the benefit? Say, okay, so think about this. We want semantic structure, that we're not redesigning everything every time we touch it. We want to bring down the repeat work of fixing things from previous sprints. We want a code base that we can share amongst all the teams, that we can unit test, and we can build UAT testing in a cohesive way. We're repeat test scripts, and we're not rewriting scripts for one bespoke system and another bespoke system. We want to allow team members to hop between teams because it's the same code base, the same semantic structure, the same interaction design. So we're talking about what we want as an end outcome, and how you get there is just a continuous conversation. And that's really what I do. Be really clear about where you want to be, as opposed to, I think it's a good idea, or I think it'd be good if we did this. Because a business manager would just go, I'm not spending all this money on a hunch. I want some empirical evidence, or I want some guarantee. And then the rest of that is just how we do that collaboratively as a team. It's a slow process. And you need to be clear that you don't have to win every battle to get through to the end. You just have to help, nudge and guide the team in that way. But that's probably what I do. It's the same context of, reverse engineer from where we want to be and how do we get back from where we are.
Yeah. I think that's like understanding agile principles as a designer and knowing the ins and outs of all of that will actually help a lot with integrating a lot of the research insights that you find and embedding yourself within that development lifecycle. Like it's profound how much just knowledge of it and knowing when to introduce these things to your development teams can help assimilate yourself and the work and the effort that we do when it comes to design research into the cycle.
It's a good practice, and even ourselves as designers, when we have to score our own research work and be transparent about that. Like we can't say we're going to do 3 months. Like, what are we going to deliver in 2 weeks or 4 weeks? We need to be transparent about that as well, because we need the business to have, see us delivering a credible practice that's not just abstract. Like us as designers, we need to show that we have tangible things that we can deliver and they're valuable. So doing it in an agile format is a really good way of getting us to, look at our own practice and say, what can I actually really do in 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Okay, we've got another one here. How have you found different industries appreciate UX or understand the value of what design brings to an organization? I guess that's what you're saying, what you're asking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let me reframe that a different way. I don't think that every industry overall understands the value of UX, because it's an entire, it's a vast umbrella of skills and things. But every industry I've worked in, from pharmaceuticals to manufacturing to SaaS to banking, they all have human problems. And generally what I talk about is in UX and the practice I bring in is, look, we can help you identify those human problems. We can help you identify the root cause of why they're happening, the frustrations they're leading to, maybe the drop off you're having in clients, all that, attribution and things like that you're having. And also identify opportunities. So we try to frame as UX designers, like the value of what we bring to that, rather than just for your industry. One thing I hear a lot, like I've worked in like real estate industry, SaaS platforms and fintech, and one thing I get a lot is, oh, we're different. We're you worked in finance, this is pharmaceuticals. You worked in pharmaceuticals, this is SaaS. It's not the case, because if customers were different, we would have a schizophrenic population. We don't have a schizophrenic population. People still have fundamental problems of, it's hard, I can't understand it, why can't you fix it, why can't I just do this? It doesn't matter what industry it's in. And that's what we chase as UX designers. We chase down all those things and think about how can we fix them.
But have you found like certain industries that understand the value of UX and have or more willing to adopt the practices of it rather than others?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the financial sector has definitely seen the value of, because they're on a customer growth spurt. A lot of the banks, a lot of financial institutions, so they're on that growth mindset. And in the financial institutions I've worked in the fintech sector, yeah, they definitely see the value of UX. Real estate as well. Surprisingly, some government services that I worked for in New Zealand and in Ireland and over here as well, but more so in New Zealand, they have a really, because it's a decentralized model in New Zealand with the 2 islands, they have a really huge value based in UX and good design thinking, because they can't just set up call centers in North and South Island. It's you can't just get up and go, So because of the distributed model they have over there, in some ways they're a little bit further along in some of the UX sectors in the government than in Australia. But Australia is catching up. And then if we look at government sectors in the UK and America and Canada, I mean, they're doing some great work in the government sector. So I think as people see the pain in call center and those kind of dropout points, they kind of think, well, we could solve that further up the stream. But it's still an uphill battle in some industries that you go into. Manufacturing can be an uphill battle. And there's certain other, small SME industries. But if you look at things like travel and flight and booking accommodation, I mean, they've seen huge adoption in UX practices and also huge benefits through that.
Yeah. Awesome.